everyone, it's Jananie and welcome back to my channel, This Story Ain't Over. So today I'm coming to you with a recent reads wrap up, and I feel like this is probably going to be my last one for the year, for 2020, because in 2021 I really want to try and do some monthly wrap ups rather than recent reads, because I just want to get a better grasp on my month and try to read more during each month, because I feel like when I do recent reads I am really bad at actually recapping what I read and let books pile up for too long. So I'm gonna try something different for 2021 and we'll see how it goes. But for this video I have 6 books to talk about. A bunch of these you guys have wanted to hear some thoughts on, so I want to do that in this video. But I don't think there's a single book on this recent reads that I did not enjoy. I liked all of these. Some of them I liked more than others, and I'm just gonna tell you my general thoughts about them. There might be some spoilers for each of these, so I'll try to put spoiler on the screen when I'm doing a major spoiler, and I will also leave timestamps down below for each book that I'm talking about in this video so that you can jump to the book that you want to hear about. But I'm going to be talking about An Absolutely Remarkable Thing, These Violent Delights, A Conjuring of Light, A Sky Beyond the Storm, Skyhunter, and Lovely War. Okay, so the first book that I have to talk about is A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor by Hank Green. And a lot of you know that I absolutely loved the first book in this duology, which was An Absolutely Remarkable Thing. And that book was just one of my favorite books of 2018, I believe, when it came out. It was just so well done and so interesting and kind of wacky as well, and really delved into how social media can affect people's lives. So this one had a much larger scope, I felt like, and also had perspectives from multiple characters in the book. And I think that's one of the reasons why this took me so long to read. It starts with multiple different characters from different perspectives telling the story of what happened after the first book, whereas the first book was just a concentrated narrative from one main character, which was April May. And I think I didn't start enjoying this book until the narration structure kind of changed. So in that way, it definitely kind of dragged for me at the beginning, but it was still super interesting, and I loved kind of the mini little mysteries that kind of go on that builds to the bigger mystery. I did read this half through the physical book and half through the audiobook. I started the beginning with the physical book and then I started listening to the audiobook afterwards. And I think the audiobook really helped with enjoying it more and just understanding what was going on, because with the different narrators for each narrator in the book, that was really helpful. But I do think Hank Green did a really great job of taking very interesting themes and kind of incorporating them into this book and seeing the effect of social media on not only a person but on a society en masse, and also just a really interesting examination of humanity, I think. I also just really wanted to recommend the audiobook for anyone who has read this or wants to read it, because there's a really interesting interview at the end of the audiobook with the author Cory Doctorow, who's the author of Little Brother, which is a book that I read in high school and really loved, but it also deals with technology and kind of the idea of Big Brother. But the two of them have a really interesting conversation about the themes in this book. I thought it was just super cool. That's about all I have to say about this without spoiling anything. And in terms of spoiler things, I honestly didn't start enjoying this until April May showed up in the book, like midway through or like a third through. And the whole situation with Carl and like him healing her, and also Carl just telling his story as well, was just super interesting. There's just so many interesting reveals that we got in this book. I think one of the strange things about this is that although we were getting the reveals, I think I liked the mystery from the first book and just not being able to pinpoint where this was gonna go. But overall, I just felt like this book was a little too smart for me, I think, and for that reason I didn't enjoy it as much, and it didn't feel as contained as the first book for me, which is another reason why I didn't enjoy it as much. But overall, it was still a really good book and a really nice follow-up to the first book, and I think it wrapped up the story very well. All right, the next book that I'm gonna talk about is These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. I've mentioned this book so many times in so many different videos, but it really is worth mentioning because it has such an interesting concept. It is a reimagining of Romeo and Juliet set in 1920s Shanghai, and it involves like the romance between Romeo and Juliet, but they are two kind of like late teens from two different gangs in Shanghai. So like this Russian gang and then this Chinese gang. It was just a really interesting concept, and that's the main reason why I decided to just buy it, and I ended up really enjoying it. It wasn't my favorite book, it didn't like wow me beyond belief, but it was a very enjoyable read. I think I loved the setting and the way that the author kind of brought it to life and breathed life into it. There's so many passages where she's just describing the way that the city is during that time, and I just love that. I also really liked the side characters in this. There were a bunch of them that I loved so much, like Benedict, Marshall, and Kathleen. They were all so great and had some really hilarious bits to them, but also some really strong character to them that I really enjoyed. And then I also really enjoyed the mystery aspect of this book and the way that they're trying to figure out this kind of madness that has swept through Shanghai and is killing off members of their respective gangs. And they start to realize that there might be some sort of monster involved. And so that aspect was just really fun, and I liked following that mystery. I think where this actually fell short for me was actually the romance, because although I liked it and I thought it was interesting and I loved their banter, I did really want more from the romance. I wanted more angst, if you could even say that, because there's already enough angst in this, but I think I wanted more in the sense that I wish we learned a little bit more about Roma and Juliet's relationship pre this book, because you find out in the book, and I will put spoiler here so that if you don't want to hear any kind of spoiler for this book, but you do find out that like the two of them did date when they were younger and were like secretly together, but then because of this like huge tragedy on both their sides and Juliet being carted off to America to do her studies, the two of them get separated and they kind of start to hate each other. But there's like this huge secret and like angst going on, but I think I just wanted like to know more about their relationship when they were younger, but they were also like really young when they had that first relationship, so that was kind of different. I don't know, I think I just wanted more out of the romance and it just didn't click enough for me for some reason. I think they just kept on saying like, oh, I can't believe you did this to me, but I wanted more, and I can't really explain this, and this probably isn't making any sense to anyone watching this. If you read this, let me know if you felt like the same as me or similar, or like if you felt that the romance was amazing, like let me know that too, and like let me know why. Maybe I'm just missing the mark, but I think I just wanted more. Like it just didn't make me like ache and longing for these characters. But this is gonna have a sequel, so I'm super excited about this because the ending of this was quite interesting, and I'm like so excited to see where she's gonna take it in the next one. And I also just really want to know what happens with our side characters as well, because they were just so precious. All right, the next book that I want to talk about is A Conjuring of Light by V.E. Schwab, and this is a book that I've been trying to finish for the longest time. I had started this years ago after I had finished A Darker Shade of Magic and The Gathering of Shadows, both of which also took me a really long time to read, just because something about the series always kind of dragged for me in general. Like every time I read one of these books, like it just seemed to be quite slow in the middle for me. I think it might just be the way that she writes her adult books or her fantasies. I just felt like there could have been less words, and the same kind of goes with this one, but I think I really enjoyed this installment and I definitely flew through it a lot quicker. Although I started it years ago, I only got like I think 50 pages in, and then recently this fall I decided to pick it up again and just go ahead and finish it, and I did, and I finished it in a few weeks, I think. And overall I actually ended up enjoying this a lot more than the first two books, and mainly I think that was because I started to actually really like the characters and really cared about what was going to happen to them. And so seeing them all kind of converge together in this book, because their stories are a little bit separate in the earlier books, and so seeing them all kind of come together in this one and kind of work together as well was just a lot of fun. And I also loved how in this book we learn a lot more about one of the characters that is sort of a villain in the earlier books, but is more of an anti-hero, which you start to learn, and that's Holland. And all the parts with him I absolutely loved. And kind of spoiler here, there's a bunch of flashback scenes with him as well, which I really enjoyed, because we finally got to hear some kind of backstory about him, which was a lot of fun. And I think he overall as a character was just so complex and interesting that I really enjoyed that part of the book. I also just really loved how a lot of the characters were often bickering over Holland, which was just peak entertainment for me because it was just so funny. And I just love how they kind of work together in this book. This definitely isn't one of my favorite fantasy series, but it was very enjoyable. And I know that Victoria Schwab is planning to write like a sequel series sort of thing called Threads of Power. And although I wouldn't really go back to it just for like the fantasy world, I would go back to it for the characters because I just really love them. So I'm excited to see where things go in that series, because there are some questions that she still leaves open in this final book. So I'm curious to see how it goes. All right, the next book that I'm going to briefly talk about is A Sky Beyond the Storm by Savita Hira. So this is the final book in the Ember Quartet, and I'm so excited to receive an early copy of this and read it before it even released. And so I filmed a full entire spoilery reading vlog, so if you want to go check that out, I will leave the link on the screen or down below. But I'm just going to go through some general thoughts that I had about it in this recent reads. For those of you who haven't read it yet or might need some convincing, though I don't know why you would need convincing, because if you've read the earlier books in the series, then you know this is amazing and totally worth it. But this finale was just so so amazing. I think Sabatir really wrapped things up really well and made it a very satisfying ending as well. There was action, there was adventure, there was like romance, and there was just so many things that kind of finally came to fruition. But I think the big thing for me was just seeing how the characters from the first book, Laya, Elias, Helene, seeing how they all have grown by the end of the series and seeing like their final form, like their final evolved form. I just love that so much. It just made me so happy. So I think this was just so satisfying in that way, because before reading this, actually I had reread An Ember in the Ashes earlier this year, and so I'm actually really happy that I did that, because it gave me this like really long perspective of the series, and seeing how these characters have changed was just so nice, and just seeing how their stories kind of come to end was just super cool. And I was just so impressed with this finale. I think out of the 4 books, this one and the first one are probably my favorites, because just so many things happen, and I think I got a lot of like really beautiful moments in this book that I was just like waiting for. I finally got them, and it was like that payoff of finally getting what you want. It was just so freaking nice. All right, the next book that I finished is Skyhunter by Marie Lu. So as you guys know, Marie Lu is one of my favorite authors, and she is my auto-buy author. Like, I always get her books when they come out, and I have like various feelings about all of her different books. My favorite of her books are the Legend series, her Warcross duology, and The Kingdom of Back. But I actually started the Young Elite series but didn't end up finishing it, though I still have them all and I plan to read them one day. And then I also have her Batman book, which I really loved as well. But I think like each one has like a different level of how much I like it, and each one has their own like special strengths, I think. So this one was interesting because it was kind of a return to dystopian and sci-fi, which is what she wrote for the Legend series. That is a dystopian and a little bit of sci-fi. And this one also involves a lot of like army and military aspects, which you also get in the Legend series. So when I heard about this, I really wanted to pick it up. And I've got to say that this wasn't my favorite Marie Lu book. It didn't like wow me as much as some of her other ones did, but it was still really enjoyable, and I just really like the characters, and just the way she set up the world was just super interesting. And I'm curious to see how it's gonna go in the next one. I think this is definitely gonna be one of those series where the more I get from this world, the more I'm gonna like it. But this follows our main character Talon, and it is set in like this futuristic world, and this one country called the Krenza Federation is kind of taking over these other countries and has like destroyed them and just massacred them. And so Talon is a refugee from this one nation and flees to Mara as a child with her mother, and she ends up joining like the army and military, and she becomes something called a striker, which is like this special ops soldier that is trained to fight against the Krenza Federation's ghosts, which are these like mutant humans who are kind of monstrous and don't have a mind of their own, and they are very deadly. And also if you get like bitten or like infected by a ghost, you turn into a ghost as well. So there's also that aspect. And so Talon is one of these strikers, and when these strikers in Mara kind of get their hands on a prisoner of war from the Krenza Federation, Talon kind of puts herself on the line trying to save this prisoner of war from getting executed, because she feels like there's something about him that might lead to answers about the Krenza Federation, and she thinks that they shouldn't kill him and that they should keep him alive and that he might yield some answers. And he does, and it's quite an interesting story. Like, I loved the bond between Red and Talon, and also in this book Talon cannot speak. She's mute because of the childhood trauma that she went through. She does not speak, so she signs throughout the entire book, which I thought was super interesting and also made her a very introspective character. You're getting a lot of her thoughts like from her head and not really from how she talks to people, and so that was interesting. But overall it was kind of a cool sci-fi read. They kind of refer to the civilization before them as the early ones, where the early ones had kind of destroyed themselves with all of the technology that they had, so it kind of sends the world into this sort of dark age, and so that's what they're living in, and they're trying to rediscover all this technology that used to exist. And I also just really liked the like side characters in this book. There were some other soldiers and like strikers that Talon is friends with that were really fun, and I specifically really liked Talon's relationship with her mother in this book, because her mother like plays a part in this book, and seeing how Talon like cares for her and like wants her to be in her life and was always going to talk to her, like that was really nice. I think a lot of times in YA parents just get kind of erased, so it was nice to see her mother in this book. But yeah, overall this is just like an enjoyable, interesting sci-fi read. It definitely wasn't my favorite, but I think it has a lot of potential to be something really cool in the future books, and I just really like the like beginnings of where the story is at and where these characters are at, and so I'm excited to see where they go. Okay, and the final book that I have to talk about today is Lovely War by Julie Berry. Okay, so I posted on Instagram a few weeks ago asking you guys what book I should pick up for my TBR next. And a lot of you commented that you wanted me to read Lovely War because you all loved it apparently. And so I think this like elevated my expectations of this a little bit, but I had started this I think in November and I'd read like the first 50 pages and just fell in love with the way it was written. And it's kind of a war story about these 4 different teens and they're like interconnecting love stories and the way their lives are taken in different trajectories during World War I. But it is told from this frame narrative of Aphrodite telling these love stories to these other gods, and they also kind of join in on the storytelling at different points in the story as well. So I remember reading those first 50 pages and just falling in love with, you know, the initial premise and everything and just the way it was written and these characters falling in love. And then I think as I started getting into it, it started to drag a bit for me and I just wanted like things to move along. So there's definitely a section in the middle where I just wish like things were just moving along a little bit faster, but I did really start enjoying this a lot in like the last third of the book. I think that was probably my favorite part, just seeing the effects of war on these characters and the way that their love kind of gets tested as well was just super interesting. One thing I will say is that I felt like this book was a little bit too rosy for a war story. Like a lot of like horrible things happen, but I think the 4 characters just kind of got away quite easily in this. And I think this is a spoiler side note, but just the way that like Aphrodite vouches for just these like specific 4 teens was just interesting to me, because like out of all of the people that she could be vouching for, it's just these like 4 people, and like, you know, are they any more outstanding or loving than any of the other people who were like dying during this war? Like that's just what I was thinking from a practical level, but it was still a really cute story. And I love seeing like the story from like the different gods' perspectives. So you get Hades at one point, you get Apollo, Ares, and you get Aphrodite, and that was really interesting. And I also really liked how this book also dealt with some heavy topics like PTSD from the war, and also like the level of racism and like segregation and all of that, with the character of Aubrey, who is from America and he is a musician and he's a soldier in like a black regiment of the army. And so it deals with like his experience as well, which is super interesting. But I think the story kind of focused more on James and Hazel's love story more than Aubrey and Colette's. But I still really enjoyed it. I think it was just a beautiful kind of lyrical read. It definitely wasn't my favorite. I think I didn't love it as much as a lot of you seem to have, but I did think it was a good book and I enjoyed it, and I was very happy to see our characters happy at the end. So I enjoyed that aspect. But I think the best part for me, and this is a spoiler, but I loved seeing the little twist at the end with Aphrodite and Hephaestus. I did not see that coming. And I should have realized it as the book was coming to a close and them talking about Hazel and like her scars and everything. But the way that she did that little like bait and switch with Hephaestus, I loved that. That was such a cool little like thing for the end of the book, and I did not see it coming at all. Like I just love that, and it's just funny just like the way she kind of rewrote the way that the Greek mythology kind of works. I just love that, so it was a lot of fun. Okay, but those are all the books that I wanted to talk about in this recent reads wrap up. I feel like I've been talking for like ages, but I really enjoyed most of these books, definitely some more than others. I think my favorite out of this recent reads was obviously A Sky Beyond the Storm, because I just love that series so much, and it just holds a very special place in my heart. But I would love to hear from you guys what you've been recently reading and what you guys thought of those books, and also what you guys thought of these books that I just talked about. Are there any that you had a different opinion about? Are there any that you had a similar opinion to me, especially for these Violent Delights? If some of you really enjoy the romance in that, I would love to hear your reasoning behind it, because for some reason it just didn't click enough for me. But overall, I think I had a pretty good reading month slash few weeks. I don't know how long it took me to read all these, but I'm happy where my reading is ending up at the end of this year. So thank you so much for watching. Go check out my Instagram, Twitter, and Goodreads if you want to hear regular updates on my reading and just me in general. Those are all linked in the description, and I will see you in my next video. So please remember that the story ain't over. Bye.